It's almost impossible to believe that a single man can cause the misery to so many.
Stuck on the back of that one as well. He's identified the victims.
When mother Nevrez Kamal opened the door, she thought it must be a mistake. Her only daughter, Azra, had passed just over a year earlier. So for her, there was no one left to lose. But the two officers standing on her doorstep weren't there about a new tragedy. They were there to reopen an old one. Something else had happened to Azra, not in life, but in death. Not in the streets, but inside a hospital morgue. What would follow would reveal more than 100 victims, but no one had even been looking for this man, until that is, one cold December morning in 2020. By the way, this is Dark Case, and you can call me Jack. I bring you true crime documentaries and other things that you may later regret knowing. Please do join the amazingly supportive Dark Case family by hitting subscribe now, and make sure that you have all your notifications turned on. Also, the Dark Case newsletter is free and takes just 5 seconds to join, and you'll never miss a new episode ever again. The link is down below. While I've got you here, let's make things a little weird. What's the most normal place that you've ever felt totally creeped out by? It could be a hallway, a church, a waiting room, a dentist chair. Whatever it is, drop it down in the comments. I'm curious. I also want to say that all Patreon and channel membership support goes a long way, and I really can't thank you all enough. But now, on with the video. I'll warn you though, this one has an insane number of twists and shocking reveals. Things that will really make you question humanity. Police showed up at a house in Heathfield, East Sussex in December of 2020. What they had, after more than 30 years, was a name. And that was thanks to a cold case reinvestigation into 2 unsolved murders from 1987. The victims were Wendy Nell and Caroline Pierce. Kent police had recovered degraded biological evidence that was taken from the original crime scenes, and they could now test it with modern familial DNA techniques. These tests narrowed a list of over 6 million profiles down to a single family line. Only one man in that family matched the age, the location, and the unknown DNA found on both women. When detectives arrived, the man answered the door calmly.
Hello. Morning. David, it's the police. Hello. We need to come in and speak to you.
Oh, yes.
Are you here alone?
No, that's
There's a sleeping machine.
well, it's just getting up here to work.
Okay. There's a few. David, if you listen to what I'm going to say,
Yes.
just we're from Kent Police and we're investigating the murders of Wendy Nell and Caroline Pierce in 1987. Okay? As part of that investigation, you've been linked as a suspect, both geographically and forensically. Okay, if you listen to what my colleague's going to say to you.
Right, David, you're under arrest on suspicion of the murders of Wendy Nell and Caroline Pierce in 1987. Do you understand?
Yes.
You do not have to say anything, but it may harm your defence if you do not mention, when questioned, something which will later lie in court. Anything you do say may be given in evidence. You are being arrested to secure and preserve evidence by means of questioning, so we can conduct searches, so forensic samples can be obtained, and to prevent your disappearance. Do you understand?
He denied knowing the victims, denied ever being to the photo shop where Wendy had worked, denied visiting Buster Brown's restaurant, the place where Caroline had been a waitress. But the evidence, it said otherwise. Fuller's DNA was on Wendy Nell's towel, on her bedding, and from intimate samples. And his fluids were found on Caroline Pierce's tights. His fingerprint in crimson red DNA was found on a plastic shopping bag in Wendy's flat. The man police had been searching for since 1987 had just been walking free, living quietly, and even raised a family for over 3 decades. But the worst was yet to come.
Yeah. Thank you.
0605, I've got the final. Go around to the left, I suppose. Take Seabrook.
So when we're ready.
Yeah.
Just need to speak to these officers, find out why you're here, and then we'll have a proper chat afterwards, okay? Are you happy the handcuffs can come off?
Yeah, definitely. In 1987, there was 2 murders. One of Wendy Nell.
Sorry, 1987.
There were 2 murders. One of Wendy Nell and one of Caroline Pierce. There's been an investigation, and they've now been able to forensically link David Fuller to them offences. So we therefore attended his address today, and then he was arrested on suspicion of the murder of Wendy Nell and Caroline Pierce in 1987.
Okay. And what cell we're going to? 15, please. Is that going to be big enough?
Possibly. I'll go 15. No idea what 15 is.
Wendy Nell and Caroline Pierce didn't know each other, but they were young, independent women living in the same Kent town in the summer of 1987. Wendy, 25, was rebuilding her life after a breakup, and Caroline, who was 20, was managing a popular restaurant and thriving in her job. Each of the women lived alone in a bedsit, and each was targeted by the same monster. On the night of June the 22nd, Wendy's boyfriend dropped her off after a date, but she never made it into work the next day. When her body was discovered, she was laying on the bed, and the scene was horrific. She had been violated and throttled, red stained the sheets, and the place was in disarray. There were no signs of forced entry, and nothing was heard by neighbours through the thin walls, so it seemed that the attack had been silent, sudden, and devastating. Just 5 months later, Caroline then disappeared outside her bedsit. Neighbours reported hearing screams this time, but no one saw who took her. 3 whole weeks passed. Her body was eventually found in a water-filled ditch, more than 40 miles away. She was unclothed apart from a pair of tights. She too had been violated and throttled. The similarities between these 2 cases were chilling. The press even dubbed them the bedsit murders. Despite massive public appeals, the investigation hit a dead end. Forensic science couldn't match the limited DNA, and no suspect emerged. The cases remained cold for over 30 years, and that brings us back to police officers entering the man's home. He was David Fuller. When detectives finally examined Fuller's life, the links became clear. He had once lived on the same road as Wendy. He was a customer at Super Snaps where she worked. His diaries and receipts were painstakingly archived, and they showed that he'd visited the restaurant Buster Brown's, the place where Caroline had worked. He hadn't just crossed paths with his women. In fact, he'd likely stalked them, and after ending their time on this earth, he simply went back on with his own life, married, working, unnoticed. But what was still to be revealed is possibly the worst thing I have ever researched. This twist is absolutely devastating to discover. Once Fuller was in custody, police turned to his house for more evidence, but what they found behind those quiet walls would shock even the most seasoned investigators. He wasn't just a meticulous record keeper, he was an obsessive archivist. The home was filled with outdated media, floppy disks, hard drives, CDs, memory cards, even handwritten diaries and printed photos. But then things started getting weird. One drawer in his spare room was rigged with a false back. It was screwed into place, and behind it there were 4 hidden hard drives. Also attached to the back of a bedside cabinet hidden in a wardrobe were more secret hard drives. On them, officers found what would become the grim centerpiece of the investigation.
Stuff on the back of that one as well. I've got the body worn on it, literally as it's happened. Well, on the back of his chest of drawers, it looks like he's got some hard drives in there, I would say. But they're stuck to the back of the chest of drawers.
Yeah, and then it's got number 28, born, died, hasn't put a date, photo.
He's identified the victims.
Sorry?
Those are
Yeah, the ones who...
No, they are dead.
There were videos, hundreds of them, each one recorded inside hospital mortuaries. and each one showed David Fuller violating the bodies of females of all ages. The videos dated back to 2008. He had filmed himself repeatedly entering the mortuaries of the Kent and Sussex Hospital and later Tunbridge Wells Hospital, and there he continued to work after the first site closed in 2011. You might wonder how this could even be possible, but he was meticulous in his planning. David got a job working in electrical maintenance in hospitals, and he'd been doing that since 1989. He would wait until the end of his shift, after staff had gone home. Using his all-access swipe card, he moved through the morgue undetected. In several videos, he returned to the same body more than once. Some of these attacks lasted minutes, others stretched beyond half an hour. And in the footage, he was strangely calm. He was focused. Sometimes he would even adjust the camera to make sure the shot was right. Sometimes he would check hospital logs or look at wristbands before beginning to do what he did. He would, bizarrely, keep meticulous records of all of this. Some of his digital folders were labelled with victims' full names, which matched up to hospital records. Others were grouped by age, appearance, or body part. One video was timestamped just hours after a young woman's passing, a woman whose mother had already been to visit, believing her child was resting in peace. But Fuller had been there before, and he came back after. Police and forensics teams worked night and day to identify the victims. By pausing the videos and cross-referencing the metadata, the time of recording, patients' names, mortuary records, they slowly built a list. Eventually, 101 victims were confirmed, and their ages range from single digits to 100 years old. 10 of them, however, have never been identified, and that staggering number may not even be final. We know that Fuller had worked in hospital since 1989, and his videos dated back to 2008, so that left nearly 20 years unaccounted for. Prosecutor Duncan Atkinson Casey described his actions as systematic, repeated, a profound violation of the dignity of the dead. And these images weren't just disturbing, they were prolific. One folder alone contained over 800,000 images and 500 videos. David Fuller had created a personal archive of horror, documenting each event, curating it, and hiding it in the home that he shared with his wife and kids. And still, no one had noticed.
I want to admit that I am admitting the offences, but I don't really want to go into detail.
Yeah. Okay.
We appreciate that.
And what offences are you admitting, David?
As you've just described to me.
Okay. In terms of the...
Yeah.
Corpses. Okay. And do you know how many occasions, David?
No.
No. Have you been recording yourself doing those things? Recording yourself in the corpses?
I admit that offences.
Yeah. Okay. What did you retain the recordings for?
I don't know either.
Okay. Was it for further pleasure, David? You know, in the same way as somebody would keep or things like that. Was it for further pleasure?
No.
David Fuller was not invisible, he was everywhere. He fixed flickering lights, he repaired faulty sockets, he checked temperature controls in the mortuary refrigerators. If staff needed something done, he was their guy. And that's exactly how he wanted it, a monster hiding in plain sight. In both facilities where he worked, he was a trusted long-term employee. Nobody questioned his presence and nobody suspected him, especially not when he walked into the mortuary carrying tools or paperwork. The post-mortem room where he committed nearly all of his offences was considered a private, sensitive space. So, as in most hospitals, there were no CCTV cameras inside. The idea was to preserve the dignity for the deceased. But in Fuller's case, that absence of surveillance gave him just the opening that he needed. The room had two-sided fridges for storing bodies. One side was accessible from the receiving area, and that was monitored by cameras. But the other side opened into the post-mortem room, and that was unguarded and unwatched. Fuller learned quickly where he could go unseen, and he took advantage of that knowledge relentlessly. His shift ran from 11 a.m. to 7 p.m. Mortuary staff typically clocked out at 4 p.m, leaving him a daily window of time of 3 hours or more, when the area was largely deserted. CCTV footage later revealed Fuller walking in and out of the mortuary area thousands of times. Yes, thousands. But because he often carried a clipboard, or he appeared to be checking fridge units, he was never stopped. He was never challenged, not even once. And he might think that the hospital keycards would leave some kind of log, some kind of digital trail. And you'd be correct, they were there, but they just weren't checked. This wasn't a failure of just one person or a single missed moment. It was a system-wide blind spot, a blind spot that existed for well over a decade. The pain that Fuller caused did not end with his crimes. It lived on in the families that he left shattered, in the courtrooms where he sat blank-faced and unmoved. Those families found the courage to speak, and what they said will stay with you. The mother of one of Fuller's youngest known victims faced him in court and said, "You raped my baby." She couldn't say no to a dirty 66-year-old man who was abusing her body. She couldn't say no, but she would have. There's no closure. How can I nurse that little broken body that's been ruined and disrespected by that vile man? One woman whose mother had passed only hours before Fuller attacked described the moment that police told her what had happened. "The pain and emotional upset seared through my body like a knife. He took advantage of her helplessness in death. We were unable to protect her." She looked Fuller in the eye and said, "David, I want you to know how much damage you have caused, how your sick and twisted behaviour has damaged families like mine. I'm pleased you are now being held accountable for what you did," only 7 hours after she passed. Another daughter recalled saying goodbye to her mother in the mortuary. "I kissed my mum to say goodbye. That should have been the last human touch that she had, full of love and devotion. Instead, it was your vile touch." And then there's Nevruz Kamal, mother of Azra Kamal. Azra's time had tragically ended in 2020 after accidentally falling from a motorway bridge. She was 24. She was a law graduate, a fighter for justice, a woman who had helped tell stories of gang victims and exploitation because she believed in giving people a voice. Mother Nevruz had visited her daughter's body in the morgue. She had even slept beside her, her head resting on her daughter's hair. She held her hand. She stroked her face. What she didn't know at the time, what police would later tell her, was that David Fuller had already violated Azra, and he came back again and again, 3 times in total. The first time was before Nevruz had arrived, the second just hours after she left, and the third 2 days later. "I spent 2 hours in the mortuary sleeping with her," Nevruz later said. "That gave me some kind of comfort. But while I was holding her hand, a man had crawled all over her skin, and there's me, kissing and cuddling, and saying my last goodbyes." Still, she refused to let shame touch her daughter's memory. "It is not Azra's shame. It is not my shame. Like women who are violated around the world, they have a voice. Azra has a voice. I am speaking out for my daughter." And she is. To this day, Nevruz is fighting not only for justice, but for legislative change, calling for harsher sentences for crimes against the deceased, and for real reform in mortuary security. Her daughter was extraordinary, and she wants to make sure that no one else suffers the same fate as her. Once the extent of David Fuller's crimes became clear, Kent police launched the largest mortuary-based investigation in UK history. They brought in 150 specially trained family liaison officers. A 1.5 million victim support programme was developed from scratch because there was no precedent for what they were dealing with. In total, over 14 million images and files were recovered from Fuller's home. He had known what he was doing was monstrous, but he kept doing it anyway. Reliving it gave him something he couldn't let go of. He had created a private world of unimaginable violation, doing it on NHS property, using NHS privileged access, in a system that never once questioned him. Libby Clark of the Crown Prosecution Service later said, Fuller's actions were depraved, disgusting and dehumanising, on a scale that has never been encountered before in legal history. As the horror of the case unfolded publicly, the government responded. Then Healthcare Secretary Sajid Javid launched a full independent inquiry, led by Sir Jonathan Michael. The aim was to understand how Fuller had been allowed to offend undetected for over a decade and maybe more, and to access how mortuary protocols needed to change nationwide. Across the country, hospital trusts began quietly reviewing their own morgue access policies, but in reality, nothing could undo the damage that had been done. In December of 2021, David Fuller stood trial for the murders of Wendy Nell and Caroline Pierce, alongside the charges relating to his actions against deceased females. Originally, he pleaded not guilty to murder, only admitting to killing the women under diminished responsibility. However, midway through the trial, on the fourth day, he changed his plea to guilty. He did this because the evidence was too strong. He thought he'd been careful, but he'd been careless. His DNA was at both crime scenes. His fingerprint was in Wendy Nell's flat. He carefully preserved invoices and diaries, all of which placed him in the exact locations at the exact times. There was also a footprint left in red DNA on one of the women's clothing, and that shoe's sole was then matched to a Clark's branded shoe that David was seen wearing in this photograph. The murders alone would have been enough for a lifetime sentence, but then came the other charges. Fuller admitted to 44 counts, relating to 78 identified victims from the hospital, and later, when more evidence emerged, he was charged once again. 12 counts relating to violations in a refrigerated hospital room, 4 counts of possession of extreme adult material, a charge that related to 23 additional victims, women who had not yet been included in the original trial. In court, families filled the gallery, some delivered statements, others watched on in silence, and as Fuller sat expressionless in the dock, the words of those that he had hurt the most were read aloud. "I feel deeply ashamed," said one victim's daughter. "It should not be my shame, it should be yours." Another daughter added, "He has blighted my memories of my dear mother. I know I should remember her as she was, but now I see what he did, and I carry that image with me." From the public gallery, someone shouted, "Scum," but Fuller didn't flinch. The sentence was delivered by Mrs. Justice Chima Grube. She called Fuller's crimes incomprehensible, adding, "Your actions go against everything that is right and humane. You had no regard for the dignity of the dead. You have left a community drowning in sorrow." David Fuller was given 2 whole-life prison terms for the crimes against Wendy and Caroline. He received a concurrent 12-year sentence for the initial morgue offences, and in December 2022 he was sentenced again 4 more years for the 23 newly identified victims. The sentence, the judge noted, was purely symbolic, and that is because David Fuller would spend the rest of his life in prison.
The depravity of what you did to those you killed and those you defiled after death reveals that your conscience is seared. It's almost impossible to believe that a single man can cause the misery to so many that you have done. But you did it, and in consequence you are paying the price that human justice can exact, the rest of your mortal life in prison. I order forfeiture and destruction of the physical evidence of your offending, which has been listed on a schedule consisting of 27 exhibits made up of numerous computer drives, discs and images.
That man will never be released. He will never touch another woman, never steal another memory, never crawl through another doorway with a stolen keycard. He will never wield another camera, nor store one more image or video in his computer, excitedly twiddling his thumbs, waiting for them to upload to his hidden hard drives. He will live out the rest of his days behind bars, remembered not as a quiet and helpful hospital worker, but as the monster in the morgue. Be careful out there, and I'll see you soon.